Hello and welcome to this latest update on the Yarslow Model Railway, and a slightly different approach this month, because what I'm going to do is to run some trains, and as the trains run round the layout, talk about what you're seeing and the developments that have taken place in the various areas. So we're going to start, as we did last month, on the branch line, and we're going to take a train from High Marsh down to Yarslow, and in this case behind a Class 2 260 it's going to be the branch stopping freight, which is not a train that we've seen, certainly not in the last 18 months or so, run down the branch. If you want to know how I operate my stopping freights, then there is a video on the channel and I will do an update, but for now let's hop aboard and set off towards Blowick Lane. Now the train in this direction doesn't stop at Blowick Lane, of course, but you can see as she runs through there are some scenic enhancements here which we'll look at in more detail. I'm really pleased with the way this is coming together, with the tree and the bushes and the flowers and the fence and everything else really beginning to come to life. Not the best of photos here, but this is clump foliage which has had scenic turf put over the top and flowers and then some dark undergrowth just to give it a bit of texture and a bit of feel. We talked about the occupation crossing last month, and here it is further advanced with some coats of paint, some static grass, some clump foliage. There's more to do here. There's a bit of weathering to be done here to sort of just tone that white down. But that's coming along really nicely. As our train crosses the bridge, which has finally been fixed down, you'll note a few more layers of varnish on the river. Quite happy with the way that looks. And that gives us a chance to have a look at how some of these bushes have been processed, if you like. Some of them are lichen, some of them are the polyfibre, and some are the clump foliage, but in all cases they're given a light dusting over glue on the top of some kind of green turfy material, and perhaps in cases of darker turf underneath. And then with a spray glue or a spray varnish, it's possible to add flowers and further layers. So you build up layers and layers. And I've said before, all scenery is lots of layers, and these bushes are no exception. And you get a feel here once it's in the background of how it looks. Some of them look a bit crude really close up, but as a general view they look really nice. Now, I'm no gardener, so I'm not following particular plants. Perhaps if I did they might look better, but there are some that I know and everybody knows, including these Buddleia. And as the layers build up you get a nice picture in the background. It's not meant to be foreground stuff, it's all background here at Butterbump, where our stopping freight arrives. Maybe one day Cole the porter will get a chance to load those crates onto something. I've used the Woodland Scenic armatures, plastic armatures and trees, very much as kind of flat background trees, and then the Woodland Scenic ready-made 3D trees in the foreground here, just to give a bit of depth. And more development work over polyfibre around the back of row boxes and around the tunnel mouth, where clump foliage has also been enhanced with glue and flowers and extra foliage. So our train engages in a bit of shunting, dropping off a few wagons into Butterbump's only siding and into the row boxes siding, collecting what was there, and then setting off behind the scenes over the top of Middle Junction and heading off towards Yarslow. And here's that same manoeuvre on the CCTV, channel 4 on the right here, showing the departure from Butterbump, and channel 3 on the left showing the train running over the Middle Junction on the flyover and heading towards Yarslow. Now it's quite a steep gradient from the arrival on the Scenic section down to the junction across the main lines, so you're not surprised that our Class 2 takes it very gingerly down the slope past the engine shed. Now you might find this incredulous, but as a result of cutting out all the windows and all the buildings behind Trinity Square, I've torn a tendon in my right arm, so I can't actually reach anything with my right arm. I can't reach out. So these bushes which sit behind Yarslow haven't been dealt with yet in terms of those layers of foliage. I'll have to get round to doing them. As I get round to the right, you can see the ones I can reach have started to have their first and second and final layers of foliage and look a bit more complete. Again, some of them in close-up look a bit weird with just flowers and light foliage on the top, but when you pan out and you get a train running and you start to concentrate on the train, in this case a fitted freight behind a J11, then these things fade into the background and they just become part of the impression of the scene. This is not pendant. I'm not adding each leaf individually. I'm trying to create an impression of a background here. And you get the same idea as our stopping freight turns up at the home signal at the end of the branch line. The home signal, of course, is a ratio kit which doesn't work. Will be replaced in due time with an MSE brass signal that does work, but that's an entire another story. Now just recently the point where the branch meets the main line failed because one of the wires that bridged the running rail with the blade became unsoldered, probably a dry joint to start with, so I had to dig out the ballast and try and resolder it, which I managed to do successfully, but I ended up with a bit of a hole and some new ballasting. So rather than try and weather it in and make it look as if it hadn't happened, I thought I'll just leave some ballast at the side of the track, a bit of ballasting under the rails, and clearly the plate laying crew have been down and done a bit of repair work. And having done that repair, it now means that trains can cross successfully from branch over the main lines and into Yarslow Yard. And as she comes to a stand at platform 3 at Yarslow, it's obvious that there's a bit of a thought process going on here as to what's going to happen on the platforms in terms of lighting and seating, and I've got to make some kind of building. I'll come back to that in a little while. Note in the foreground that most of the ground signals are now in place. Away from scenery, there's been a development in one of the trains. This is Stopper 7, a strange train that runs from Midworth to Yarslow once in the timetable at the end of the day. On this occasion it's pulled by a V1, although it can be pulled by absolutely anything that I find sitting in the loco storage area, and now includes a new Hornby 6-wheeled brake. It's got lights, which is a rather strange thing which I'm not going to use, but I like the vehicle. And here's the full set, looking every inch the sort of thing that Midworth have just found lying about and thrown together to make this particular train. The 4-wheeled brake at one end clearly has been cascaded down a few times towards the end of its life, a pair of non-vestibule coaches and then a 6-wheeled brake at the other end, and it's likely that these coaches have been cascaded away from suburban stock that's currently running into Trinity Square. That suburban stock itself about to be cascaded away because of the arrival of the DMUs. So this stuff is very much on the way out and typical of the sort of trains that you would see running on these weird late night services. If it could turn a wheel, it ran a service. One train I haven't done anything with is what I've called the kit train. This is the fitted freight that's been made up of the unpainted Dapol vehicles and the kit built vehicles, but it runs behind the Dapol 21, which is a lovely model, and I'm still running it in. And the effect of all those layers of scenery can be observed here, as one of my favourite trains, the Class 20, runs through with the oil train. Now as she passes Yarslow, I'll just expand on the problems I've got here, and that is that the island platform needs some kind of waiting shelter and some kind of canopy, and the main platform needs a canopy, and I'm struggling to find anything northeastern style that would actually match my requirements. The northeastern did use canopies that covered both tracks. I don't like that. I'm trying to find something slightly different. I'll get there. In a mad moment, you may have noticed, if you've been watching back on these videos, that the signal box went from maroon to green. Well, I've painted it back to maroon. Not quite sure why I painted it green. And as that ordinary passenger train departs Yarslow, we get a nice look at the country end of the station, with the Birch's cottage in the background and the scenery beginning now to give the stage on which our trains can perform. And here's the Scenic working behind the permanent way yard, which I can reach as the stopper passes in the foreground. And again you can see it's polyfibre and lots of different layers built up with greens and different colours. I've done some work on the road overbridge. You'll notice in the previous video there was some damage done to it, and I've now added the grass verges on either side using various lengths of static grass and my trimmer to trim down at the roadside and leave the grasses longer at the back. And when I can reach across again, I will do something with these polyfibre hedges and add some green foliage and some colour. Similar to this is a polyfibre bush which has been coloured. We've got the reds and the yellows and the browns all added in, the greens, the dark green undertones, and I'm really quite pleased with the way these have come out. I've somewhat experimented as I've gone along, which is not really the way I tend to do things. I like to experiment off the board and then bring my newfound skills onto the board. But there's a kind of freedom with this. You add a bit of this, a bit of that. If you think it needs a bit more colour or a bit more green, you just bung it on. And actually I'm quite pleased with the way it's all turned out. So let's head off to Trinity Square, and you'll recall my attempts at perspective modelling. Well, this is how far I've got. These two buildings have been reduced down on the printer to 65% full size. I've made a piece of the shovel to represent the front of it on the left hand side, and I've got some pavement pieces to go on when I get the colour right at the bottom, and the road will continue up to where that blue bit now is between the building and the joint. I've done some work on the shops on Bridge Street. So this is the Ayres shop. Ayres was my late mother, who could knit for England. If it was an Olympic sport, she'd be up there. So this is a kind of knitting and haberdashery shop. And next door is F. Phillips. I haven't got a clue who F. Phillips is. It just happened to fall out when I was playing around with the lettering. But he sells televisions and those big old fridges and the sort of things that were being sold in the early 60s. Now, since joining the North Eastern Railway Association, I've been trying to northeasternise the layout a bit, and one of the enhancements has been the building of this coal stage. A Wills crane has been modified, and a coal tub scratch built with a bit of bent wire, and this is the effect. So the crane was used to transfer the coal in the tubs from the wagons on one side to the loco bunkers on the other. In the engine shed I've used ballast to represent ash. It needs repainting, of course. And that water crane kit has now been built. Weird plastic it's made out of. It took me an age to find something to stick it, but now I've done that, it's come out alright, and again northeastern colours. And more work on the groundwork behind the loco shed as the van's train passes in the foreground. The white strip on the right incidentally is there because I haven't yet fixed down the overbridge frontage. Made but not yet complete are the two buildings that hide the switches and the point levers here at Trinity Square, right at the end of the goods shed head shunt. The groundwork at Trinity Square has been improved using my usual method of the poly ripple and then painted with a grey brown colour. There's lots of weathering to be done and lots of clutter to be added. You look at any photograph of an old station, an old terminus, the amount of clutter is immense, and that's one of the jobs that's got to be done next. The old Airfix canopy kit has been used to create a canopy at the goods shed. I'm quite pleased with this. Again, the cream and green colours I like. Detailing work going on in this area with the windows in the goods shed, and once I get the tops on, I'm not going to use the kit tops. I'll use bits of them, but the glazing and the glazing bars I'll make myself. The end, incidentally, I'm going to use the original Airfix Valance because it's quite nice. The Trinity Square building continues to receive coats of paint. The windows have gone in. They all need painting, but they're in for now. And now that you start to take photographs of locomotives at Trinity Square, the impact of the buildings behind really beginning to tell. In the same way that I've got to come up with buildings and canopies at Yarslow, I've got to do the same thing here at Trinity Square over platforms 1 and 2 and platforms 3 and 4. I've got to construct some long canopies to come down the platforms and the one that sits across the concourse at the far end. So adding more details to buildings like windows and doors and then painting those details. Every job I do is one less job I've got to do. So what is the light at the end of the tunnel? Well, I'm now convinced it's not a train coming the other way. I'm now happy that by the end of September, October time, I'm going to be in a place where the modelling, the basic modelling has been finished. I've done the baseboards, I've done the track, I've done the wiring, I've done the basic platforms and backgrounds and all this kind of stuff. Essentially, I've got a couple of buildings to make, I know that, but by the end of October, I'm really hoping that all I'm down to is doing people, animals, vehicles, the odd tree, the odd bush, just to enhance things, that kind of thing. I really think I'm making some good progress, and the light at the end of the tunnel is very much in view. Thanks for sticking along. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.